Hi, welcome to the University of Arizona School of Information Colloquium meeting. Today we're going to hear from Laura Dozal, and she is going to be talking to us about mixed methods for understanding visual frames in social movement. Laura is a third-year PhD candidate at the University of Arizona. She's a graduate assistant for university analytics and institutional research, data science ambassador for the Computational Social Science Certification Program, and she also works really hard at the iSchool PhD social coordination. So she has a bachelor's degree in English literature and a master's degree in communication, culture, and technology. Her recent work has focused on analyzing and visualizing network clusters to understand social behavior. Her methods include deep learning for natural language processing applications of online crime and disinformation, and quantitative network analysis to identify community spaces. Her future work will include tackling information retrieval concepts applied to topics in information behavior. Today, she'll be talking with us about mixed methods for understanding visual frames in social movements. She uses computational methods to analyze images, and information can be communicated about actions, messages, and causes that surround a social movement. Laura uses frame analysis and Gillian Rose's 4 sites of critical visual methodology to analyze visual interpretations. Laura will also talk to us about social network analysis applications of exponential random graph models, stochastic block models, and sentiment analysis with neural networks. Using social movements as a way to understand visual frames will open up new applications of understanding how visuals create meaning through perspective. During the presentation, everybody is welcome to post their questions in chat and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Selena. So hello, everyone. This is kind of an overview of a recent literature review I did for my comprehensive exam. And essentially what I did was explore computational methods that can help identify visual frames in a large collection of images relating to social movement practices. And this is kind of the reason for my research in this field. So the presentation will look at the how, the what, and the why I'm taking this interdisciplinary approach and why it's important. And then I'm looking at mixed methods and the theories and the concepts behind the research. So why an interdisciplinary approach? I'm hoping to identify new interdisciplinary approaches using social movement research and data science for identifying visual frames and images online. Essentially, I want to use visual analysis methods to apply visual frames of social movement images through computational methods so that we can potentially see information being communicated based on actions, messages and causes surrounding a social movement, and particularly doing this by looking at how images are circulated throughout online networks. So the gaps, also this interdisciplinary approach, I believe, can help maybe fill in some gaps that haven't been explored yet in both network and frame analysis and also social movement analysis. So this research intends to review methods that have the ability to work with visual framing concepts and cater to the big data phenomenon. So more generally, as online images continue to increase in volume with a velocity that is always growing, and a variety that comes with various authors or contributors, it adds to the big data phenomenon that allows for the application of analysis to establish theoretical concepts. So essentially, network and frame analysis are included in the core concepts of social movement research, but not much research, if any, has combined the two. And then to add on to that, visual frames of social movement are still an under-researched topic, particularly for online images. And so I thought that visual sentiment analysis methods might have the potential to tackle the big data phenomenon. But with all of this great potential for looking at visual data, there are also challenges, right? So one challenge is temporal modeling. So how, when applied to maybe video sequences, how can we look at the perceptual metrics, and how can, like, looking at how does this neglect, like, how events happen over time, and maybe just even two static images side by side. Also looking at perceptions of color could be a challenge, where sometimes whereas color is a key attribute, there are currently no widely accepted perceptual quality metrics explicitly considering color. So looking maybe like symbols of color can potentially be helpful, but that's also very perception based. Also new modalities of images, so 360 videos, light fields, point clouds, etc., require new or different or modified approaches. And then the aesthetic assessment, so an aesthetic quality of an image is affected by numerous factors, so lighting, color, contrast, and composition. And these are all useful in different applications and scenarios, such as image retrieval and ranking, recommendation and photo enhancement. One of the key challenges is the inherently subjective nature of aesthetic assessment, resulting in ambiguity and the ground truth labels. Another important issue is to explain the behavior of deep aesthetic prediction models. And this is kind of a lot, but essentially, like, what is the aesthetic of an image, and how can we actually concretely understand it or perceive it? So the three theories that I'm going to review today are visual framing, social movement framing, and semiotics. Frames help people make meaning from a situation by helping them organize an experience and perceive particular aspects of the information. Essentially, they're ways to interpret a social experience and pull meaning out of that experience in mostly subjective ways. Visual frames can be defined as devices of an image that convey meaning through aspects of association, composition, and socio-technical elements. Their associational qualities are based on reference and metaphor, compositional properties, and their compositional properties, that can be indexed or differentiated by other images, and social and technological context that can aid in explicit understandings of reality. So essentially, visual frames just help give an idea of what message is being conveyed or what meaning is being conveyed in the image. Social movements are collectivities engaged in non-institutionalized discourses and practices aimed at changing the existing condition of society. More recently, the engagement of this collective can also include digital and face-to-face protest, communication, campaigns and petitions, etc., using digital technologies. Social movement frames build frames by highlighting certain experiences, implementing meaning through forms of perception, and setting goals to foster a higher likelihood of participation. So since its introduction to the field of social movement, framing has been used to guide understanding of social movement participation, and is a very influential field in social movement practice and academia. So semiotics, looking at kind of like the image itself, looking at like the composition of an image, or rather compositionality, which refers to the material qualities of an image, including content, color, and spatial organization. These modalities can be applied individually or combined. So signs in regards to compositionality can be used to reduce and understand knowledge. And then semiology is the study of signs and how signs are used. And it is implemented to understand the social effects of ideological implications that create knowledge. So here's just an overview of the resources that were used in the previous slides. Okay, so the concepts that I'm using are visual interpretation, including the sites of meaning making. So Gillian Rose created a model for visual interpretation that uses 4 sites of meaning making. They include a site of production, the image itself, the site of audiencing, and circulation. This model shows circulation within audiencing, but in the next couple slides, I'll show how like Rose kind of gives a little more attention to circulation, and I think that it's even more apparent now as digital technologies and images are circulated in various ways online, and so I think that can be its own faction within the model. But in regards to social movements, the sites of meaning making implement kind of like a framework for using visual frames to interpret images that portray actions, events, and messaging from social movements online. So to get deeper into these concepts, the site of production is a form of visual interpretation that contributes to the effects of visual frames based on the technologies used to make the image, the access to those technologies, and the affordances provided by those technologies. So the perception of an image based on its production value can be essential to how a frame is understood. For example, the camera used in the 1920s has different technological affordances than that of the 50s and today's 2020s. These cameras implement a particular perception of the composition of an image and record that point in time or a falsification of reality, depending on the mechanism used. The site of circulation, kind of what I touched on earlier, is a form of visual interpretation that is understood as the technological and social modalities of movement, between an image's production and its audiences. So both places can be different in time and in environment, but the features of movement between these sites is determined by the image's circulation. So for example, the provenance of an art piece can help curators infer aspects about the circulation, about its circulation, or the algorithm on a specific social media platform can help shape how an image of daily life, a protest event, or even a social movement campaign is shared. The site of the image itself can be considered a commodity based on its objective and emotional qualities. So these qualities can be intentionally or unintentionally perceived through the space and structure of visual effects found in the image. And the site of audiencing is when an interested viewer understands the meaning of an image and accepts or rejects them based on the circumstances of the viewing. The types of technological displays, identifiable elements of an image, and social identities of a viewer have the ability to elicit a particular audience perception. So now we're going on to the methods, and particularly the computational methods, looking at network analysis and deep learning. So network analysis focuses on the patterns of ties between nodes or individuals, and are useful to understand social movement communities, which can help understand the patterns of visual framing within the content being shared across these communities. In this particular setup, Visual frames at the site of circulation and production can be looked at through the lens of diffusion practices and group formation, which are concepts in network analysis. Particularly, group formation looks at processes of how communities come together to develop over time, and can be applied to online and offline communities. And diffusion practices deal with how information spreads throughout communities, and has also been theorized on how types of information spread. An example is innovation. So one of the methods used for group formation is, like Selena mentioned, exponential random graph models. Essentially, the model computes the probability of an observed network over all possible networks that could have been observed. So I guess a little bit more into the concept, ERGMs, as I've heard them be called, use the observed network as a sample network to be seen as one instantiation of a set of possible networks with similar features, as sometimes weighted parameters. This includes direct and indirect ties and node attributes, and it maximizes the probability of the observed network over other, usually thousands, similar generated networks. And so diffusion practice, I looked at the positional analysis and community structure. So, well, in reference to positional analysis, excuse me, the positionality of a node, or of a node within a network, has the ability, can look at like patterns of the position of one node compared to the position of another node, and how these nodes perform similar functions within the network, and kind of how they work with or against various network structures. And so looking at the overall community structure, stochastic block models can be applied to analyze the community structure of networks, which in turn can enable an underlying implication of the overall social structure. So in this case, instead of finding nodes who share the same set of ties, stochastic block models can find nodes that share similar positions within their groups. The next computational method I review is deep learning. So visual frames at these methods look at visual frames at the sites of the image itself and audiencing. And along with deep learning, I include sentiment analysis, particularly visual sentiment analysis. So visual frames for social movements online are derived not only from components of the image, but also how the viewer understands the meaning of an image. And compositional and social modalities derive from particular qualities of an image, aid in understanding the meaning-making process through the image itself. And so I kind of explore how computational research using a mixture of visual and textual content can be explored and review sentiment through signs represented as image features and words, particularly through methods of deep learning. And a lot of the studies that I reviewed look at a combination of visual and text analysis to identify different sentiments, where others take image features and attempt to classify them correctly. One of the readings, the author is escaping me, but looks at, instead of looking at the subjective sentiment of text and visual combination, it objectively pulls parts of the image to classify them in that sense. And so I thought that was these two kind of approaches are a good juxtaposition to actually see what works well in different situations. A lot of the research I reviewed applies convolutional neural networks. in combination with other types of classification and feature extraction and word embedding models. I'm not sure if I should go. So essentially, it learned. Excuse me. The CNN model learns a collection of filters, each of which adjusts its weight to highlight local relationships that can occur anywhere in the image. The collection of these filters are combined with a nonlinear function, where many layers of filters can be composed. And this is that was kind of like a description that Dr. Morrison here at the iSchool provided, which I thought was very helpful. And there's like the visual review of that. So going deeper, visual and text sentiment analysis in social movements in particular looks at how emotions and affect can be represented by signs and qualities of an image. Essentially, my idea was to use sentiment via these images and apply them in social movement images. So the multimodality of the images, as well as any textual elements attached to it, can be used for sentiment applications to review signs that generate meaning. For instance, a sentence or part of an image can be seen as a signifier, which is like an image or a sound, and the signified, which is the concept of a sign, is the meaning-making composition that compromises the visual. So a lot of time, a lot of the research looks at a less big data version of visual analysis within social movements. And so I think that if we incorporate those qualitative coding methods or qualitative coding methods into that, into a larger application for online images, I think it could be very beneficial. And here is the resources for this computational method section. And overall, this review of social movement image analysis understands that types of connections within the group can help to identify visual frames in social movement images online. Visual frames in social movement have been a foundational methodology in the field of research that implements notions of meaning-making and goal setting for movements and their members. Framing as devices to convey meaning through elements of association, composition, and social and technical components can create outlets for different methods of visual interpretation. Theorizing the application of these approaches can inform actual experimentation on large amounts of data to see if outcomes exhibit a visual frame based on the visual interpretation methods. So thank you all for paying attention. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Dr. Lishikatz, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I was just clapping. Thanks for, again, I can make a comment. Thanks for a great talk. I'm excited to hear more about how you start to put some of these ideas into practice and maybe develop a pilot study where we get into some of the specifics of looking at a particular social movement and start to think about how you might collect data and things like that.
Cool, thank you.
I have a few questions, but I'll give other people the chance to go first.
Well, I have two completely amateur questions to ask. First is about the word framing. I'm a little bit confused about this. Are we talking about you're trying to kind of trying to, after the event happens, you're trying to kind of retrieve the doctrines, the kind of moralities being generated or being adopted during these movements? Or are you talking about like we are deliberately trying to, how do I put this? trying to put together a kind of doctrines you want to push forward from this. Yeah. Yeah, just sorry, I don't think I made it clear enough. So just please explain the word framing again to me. Thanks.
No, that's a great question. So here we're not looking at the overall framing of why a social movement is a social movement, or like why they're a collective trying to change part of society. Essentially, it's looking at the image, qualities of an image based on the visual interpretation model, or essentially that this is what I'm thinking. But it's looking at that just based on the image and how what can be perceived from that image and what meaning can be made or taken away from it. And in particular, just a lot of so how it's made and what it's made of and who the audience is can have a big impact on what exactly is being framed in an image.
So, for example, if I have an image of a group of people eating meat, and in that case, you can think about like if some vegetarians see this picture, they might see, oh, it's barbarians, and some other people see it might, oh, it's family time. So it's kind of just how can you interpret, and can also ask like, do you also ask like, why do people take this picture of these people eating meat?
Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly.
Oh, right. That's clear now.
Yeah.
And I think I had another question, but I can't recall. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joshing.
So you had said there are 4 parts of Gillian Rose's idea of visual frames: the production, image itself, circulation, and audience. Which one do you think is most applicable to what we're going through today in the pandemic?
I actually think they're all, I think that they're all stronger if you look at them as like a whole. I don't think one individual, I guess, mode can stand alone, if that makes sense. I mean, in theory it can, but I think that they need to be taken as a whole to get the full visual interpretation of a visual.
So if we look at the idea of how images impact social movement and how we perceive social movement, how is this different? Like, so we look at the 1960s social movements and civil rights, where before it was viewed abstractly as terms of segregation, education, land and rights, properties, all that stuff. And then people started taking pictures, and in particular, pictures of other people being hosed down in the streets or being thrown down by dogs. And those pictures changed the whole perception of the social movement within the 1960s. Is that the same thing? Does it compare to what you're sharing with us today?
I think that is yes, I think that's a framing of an image. And I think that today it's just more widespread because of our digital technologies. So during the pandemic, there's social movements happening. There's social movements happening now. And I think people can see that and access that information in those images more readily. And in real time now. And I think that I think that is what has changed, I guess. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that like just the real time aspect and the amount of various types of images on a particular event can help shape the meaning or the message one way or another.
Yeah, that does make sense. It actually reminds me of, I'm old enough to remember the first Iraq war in Kuwait. And I remember the adults making a big deal out of seeing war in real time. Well, to us, that was all we knew. And so, yeah, your answer makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Dr. Beathard, you have a question?
Yes, I'll put my hand down. Yeah, thanks for an interesting survey. So the one thing I was left wondering, you've talked about a bunch of sort of theories and qualitative approaches, and then a bunch of, some of them pretty hardcore computational approaches.
Right.
What does the gap look like in this sort of, if there is such a thing, current state of the art of this field? Like, clearly you're imagining something that transcends these two. How big is that gap right now, and how hard is it going to be to sort of close it in a way that solves the problems you're interested in? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think currently some of these methods are more NLP, like the computational methods of that you described as hardcore. So it's less image-based and more kind of sentiment analysis on news reports, Twitter, Facebook, etc., blogs, and I think it's more of a natural language processing approach to these to the topic of social movements, and visual analysis has been a big topic, but it's been more on the qualitative side. So kind of just looking at a set or a collection of images and going through and doing that interpretation. So I'm not sure how wide of that gap or big of a stretch it would be to maybe pool these two aspects of the research into the visual interpretation that could potentially happen. But I know it's slowly creeping in that direction, hopefully. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Rami, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Honestly, I'm too much of a beginner to be able to give you something very productive about this, but one of, I guess, Salina's question, I hope I pronounced that right, just made me think about this. What about, I guess, maybe tell me a little bit more about how I was just recently, for the last couple of years, in a lot of social movements, because we've just been, so I'm from Lebanon and I'm in Lebanon right now. So it's just been kind of crazy here. But one of the things that's I found really interesting as all of these social movements kind of used all of these images is, to what extent now images can be declared fake because it's just so easy to edit images, and to what extent the content of an image just means very different things to different people, because people are biased towards reading the image in a way that would be conducive to them. So it's real if I would like it to be real. And it's, so I'm wondering how this falls into like these sorts of projects. And again, I really don't know that much about this, but I'll be happy to provide you with tons of data and images, I guess when I join the program, hopefully.
Oh yeah, that would be great. No, that was a great question. Thank you so much. I think that I mean, potentially this could maybe cover a wide range of questions. And I think you asked two questions. I mean, I guess, excuse me, there you have two research questions in there, right? So how can we identify fake, false images or corrupted images, or just like fake images, I guess. And I feel like there are ways to you could think of ways to potentially identify images like that based on these interpretations. And I think a lot of it goes to particularly the side of production. And so you can go really deep into maybe like the forensics of an image and how it was created and things like this on one side. And then another research question, I guess, would be looking at the different, I guess, audiencing or even circulation, right? So what biases do people have, or what biases do forums have? Do social forums, or does like the mode of circulation have when showing an image, right? And so I think that is very important to like look into, because it can be, it's not just a concrete, like, this is what this means and that's what it is, right? There's so many different factors that come into play. And so I think there's not like one answer to that. I think it's like a good way to move forward and look into, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if there are any other questions, you can also email Laura. And
Yes, please.
yes. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's new to me too. And so I feel like we've learned quite a bit in looking at images differently. Thank you so much, Laura. And again, if anybody has questions, please feel free to email her. And thank you for coming.